At 6 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand while I was pulling my hair into a tight bun. I hadn't even finished tying my boots yet. I glanced at the screen expecting a work alert or one of those automated base reminders that always showed up too early. Instead, it was my sister. "Don't go home today." That was it. No hello, no explanation. Just that one sentence sitting there like it had somewhere important to be. I stared at it longer than I probably needed to. Not because I was confused, but because the tone felt off. My sister Courtney didn't send messages like that unless she thought she was in charge of something. This wasn't concern. It wasn't panic. It read like instructions. I didn't reply. I never do when something feels incomplete. I finished tying my boots, grabbed my cover, and headed out the door. The air outside was still cold, the kind that makes you wake up whether you want to or not. I drove to base the same way I always did, coffee in the cup holder, radio low. Nothing unusual. But the message stayed with me. By the time I parked and walked toward my building, my phone buzzed again. "Seriously, just don't go back there today." Still no reason. Still no explanation. That was the first thing that caught my attention. Courtney loved explanations when they benefited her. When she skipped them, it usually meant she didn't want questions. I was already on duty. Once my day started, it wasn't something I could just walk away from. That wasn't new to her. Courtney knew my schedule better than most people. She'd always made it her business to know where I was, what I was doing, and how flexible I could be. Usually so she could ask for something, or avoid being told no. Inside the building, the day moved fast. Briefings, updates, routine tasks. Nothing dramatic. But every time my phone vibrated in my pocket, I noticed. Around mid-morning, another message came through. "I'm just saying this for your own good." That one almost made me laugh. Almost. Courtney never did anything for my own good, unless it accidentally lined up with hers. I didn't answer that one either. If you grow up in a family like mine, you learn early that silence can be more useful than arguing. Courtney had always been the loud one, the confident one, the one who spoke for everyone else even when no one asked her to. I was the opposite. I did my job. I handled my responsibilities. I didn't need a running commentary. That difference used to bother me when we were younger. It stopped bothering me when I realized it wasn't accidental. Courtney didn't just talk more. She took space. She assumed authority. And most of the time, people let her. By late morning, I checked my phone during a break and saw a missed call. Then another, both from Courtney. No voicemail. That was unusual. She loved leaving voicemails, especially the kind where she could control the narrative without interruption. I pulled up my messages again and reread the first one. "Don't go home today." Not "are you okay?" Not "call me." Not even "something's wrong," just a flat directive. Like she'd decided the outcome and was informing me of it. I started thinking through what home meant in her mind. It wasn't my apartment near base. She'd never cared about that. It was the house. The one my grandparents left me. The one Courtney liked to call the family house, even though the paperwork never said that. That house had been an issue long before that morning. Not an argument exactly. More like a background hum. Courtney suggesting things. My parents backing her up. Small comments about upkeep management, how hard it must be for me to deal with it while working full-time. All framed as concern. None of it asked for. I hadn't been there in a couple of weeks. I'd planned to stop by that evening after work, check the mail, make sure everything was fine, nothing urgent, just routine. Apparently that plan didn't sit well with my sister. Another message came through right before lunch. "Just trust me on this." That was when I stopped seeing it as a suggestion. Courtney didn't ask for trust. She demanded compliance and called it trust when people went along with it. I slid my phone back into my pocket and went back to work. I didn't feel angry. I felt alert. There's a difference. Anger makes you rush. Alertness makes you pay attention. By early afternoon, I had a few minutes and stepped outside to make a call. Not to Courtney, to my attorney. I didn't give him a dramatic story. I didn't need to. I asked a simple question about property access and what it meant if someone tried to act on behalf of an owner without permission. He didn't sound surprised. He asked me a few clarifying questions and told me to call him back if anything escalated. When I hung up, there was another missed call from Courtney. This time she left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it yet. I didn't want her voice framing the situation before I had facts. Instead, I checked my messages again. There was a new one shorter than the others. Please, just today. That one told me more than all the others combined. Courtney wasn't warning me about something dangerous. She was buying time for what she hadn't said. But she was counting on me doing what I'd always done in the past, which was give her the benefit of the doubt. I didn't. By the time my shift was halfway done, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. Hey, this is Mark. I live down the street from your grandparents' place. Just wanted to check if you were expecting people there today. I read it twice, then a third time. What kind of people? I texted back. Not sure, he replied. Truck, boxes, looked busy. I stood there for a moment, phone in my hand, letting that settle. The pieces lined up quickly after that. The early message, the urgency, the insistence that I stay away for the day. Courtney wasn't trying to protect me from something. She was trying to keep me from seeing it. I typed a quick thank you to Mark and told him I'd handle it. Then I checked the time. Still hours left in my duty day. Plenty of things I couldn't just drop. I put my phone away and went back inside, already reorganizing the rest of the day in my head, adjusting priorities without changing my expression. Courtney called again while I was walking down the hallway. This time I let it ring. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared enough to want the full picture before she started talking. I already knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening at that house, it wasn't spontaneous, and it wasn't harmless, and it definitely wasn't something she wanted me walking into unannounced. I slid my phone back into my pocket and kept walking, letting my stride stay steady, even though my head was already rearranging priorities. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner and stale coffee, and someone laughed down the hall like it was a normal day. I nodded at a coworker, returned a greeting, and kept moving. Outwardly, nothing changed. Internally, a familiar pattern had snapped into focus. Courtney didn't wake up one day and decide to manage my life. She'd been practicing for years. Growing up, she was the one who spoke first and loudest. If a decision needed to be made, she made it. If a story needed telling, she told it. Our parents treated her confidence like competence, which worked out well for her, and less so for anyone who questioned it. I learned early that pushing back only dragged things out. Courtney thrived on friction. I didn't. When teachers asked questions, Courtney answered for both of us. When relatives visited, she narrated. When something went wrong, she reframed it before anyone else could. She wasn't malicious in an obvious way. She just assumed the center and stayed there. I wasn't invisible. I was dependable. That was worse. Dependable kids don't get checked on. They don't get follow-up questions. They don't get asked what they need. They get used as proof that everything is fine. Courtney knew that. She leaned into it. If something needed to be handled quietly, she volunteered me. If something needed to look organized, she took credit. By the time I was old enough to notice the pattern, it was already reinforced. Courtney spoke. My parents nodded and I adjusted. That rhythm followed us into adulthood without anyone formally agreeing to it. My phone vibrated again as I stopped by my desk. Another message from Courtney, longer this time. I didn't open it. Length meant persuasion, and persuasion meant she was starting to worry. She'd always worried when control slipped. When our grandparents were still alive, Courtney positioned herself as their point of contact. She handled errands, made suggestions, offered help. On the surface, it looked generous. In practice, it meant she filtered information. If something needed a decision, she framed the options. If paperwork showed up, she looked it over. I didn't interfere. Not because I didn't care, but because my grandparents weren't confused. They noticed who listened and who managed. They noticed who showed up without an agenda. They never said it out loud, but they adjusted accordingly. Courtney didn't like that adjustment. When the house came up in conversation, Courtney called it the family place. That phrase did a lot of work. It implied shared authority without stating it. It turned boundaries into technicalities. Every time she used it, she watched for pushback. When none came, she took it as agreement. I never agreed. I kept my involvement boring on purpose. Bills paid, Maintenance handled. No drama. The less attention it drew, the less Courtney could justify inserting herself. That strategy worked until it didn't. At lunch, I finally listened to the voicemail she'd left earlier. Her voice was soft, careful, like she was trying not to scare an animal. "I'm just trying to help," she said. "You don't need to rush over there today. I've got things under control." Under control. The phrase landed the same way it always did. Courtney didn't mean things were stable. She meant she was in charge. I deleted the voicemail and set my phone face down. The choice felt small, but it mattered. Courtney relied on immediate responses. Silence forced her to improvise, and improvisation was where she slipped. In the afternoon, a message from my attorney came through with a short answer to the question I'd asked earlier. Clear, direct, no drama. I read it once and put the phone away. Facts were lining up faster than Courtney probably expected. By then, the memory that had been hovering all morning finally sharpened. A few years back, Courtney had told a cousin not to come by our grandparents' place one afternoon. She'd said it casually, like a scheduling conflict. When the cousin ignored her and showed up anyway, half the furniture was rearranged boxes stacked in the corner, and Courtney had a story ready about helping clean up. Nothing illegal, nothing confrontational, just enough change to make it awkward to question. The cousin had backed off. Courtney had learned something. Patterns don't repeat exactly, they adapt. I checked the time and thought about the truck Mark mentioned. Boxes meant movement. Movement meant urgency. Courtney wasn't planning a conversation. She was creating momentum. I finished what I needed to finish and kept my tone even with everyone I spoke to. No rushed decisions. No visible distraction. I'd learned that looking calm buys you space, and space is where options live. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't check it right away. I waited until I was seated, until my hands were steady, until I was sure the reaction wouldn't show on my face. Then I looked. Courtney had sent a photo. Not of herself, of the front of the house. The angle was casual, like she hadn't meant to include the truck in the background. The message below it was short. "See, taken care of." I stared at the image and felt something settle, not in my chest, but lower. A decision, quiet and final. Courtney wasn't testing boundaries. She was assuming they didn't exist. I didn't respond. I forwarded the photo to my attorney and typed one sentence underneath it. "This is happening now." A reply came back almost immediately. "I'm available when you are." I stood up, slid my chair in, and headed toward the exit. I wasn't leaving early. I wasn't rushing. I was adjusting. There's a difference. Rushing is emotional. Adjusting is procedural. As I walked, I replayed Courtney's first message in my head. Not the words, but the timing. 6 a.m. Early enough to catch me before my day started. Early enough to feel urgent. Early enough to feel authoritative. She hadn't asked if I was coming home. She'd told me not to. That told me everything I needed to know about how she saw this playing out. She expected compliance. She expected me to stay away long enough for whatever she was doing to look permanent. I opened my car door, set my bag down, and sat there for a moment with the engine off. The steering wheel felt cool under my hands. I took one breath, then another, and started the car. Courtney could manage stories. She could manage people. What she couldn't manage was process once it started moving without her permission, and I was done letting her decide when I was allowed to show up. The engine idled as I pulled out of the parking lot, and I rolled the window down just enough to let the cold air cut through the car. It helped me think. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I drove with both hands on the wheel and let the facts line up the way they always did when I stopped trying to argue with them. The house wasn't just a place to sleep. It never had been. That was the mistake Courtney kept making. She treated it like a setting. My grandparents treated it like an anchor. They bought it decades ago, long before property values turned into dinner conversation. It wasn't big or flashy. Solid structure. Quiet street. The kind of place where nothing happened unless someone went out of their way to make it happen. When I stayed there during summers, my grandfather fixed things slowly, and my grandmother labeled folders carefully. They didn't rush decisions. They didn't trust enthusiasm. They trusted consistency. Courtney visited when it suited her. She brought opinions. She brought suggestions. She brought the idea that things would be easier if everyone just agreed with her version of how things should work. My grandparents never did. They didn't argue with her. They listened, nodded, and then did exactly what they'd planned to do anyway. When paperwork came up, they read it themselves. When something needed to be signed, they asked questions. Courtney hated that. She preferred situations where her confidence replaced clarity. When they passed, there wasn't confusion. There wasn't a scramble. The documents were clean. The instructions were clear. The house was mine. Not shared. Not managed on my behalf. Mine. That detail mattered more than Courtney ever admitted. I learned about it the first time she asked casually if I wanted help handling things. She said it like she was offering to carry a box, not step into a decision-making role. I told her no. She smiled and said okay. Then she asked again a few months later. Same tone. Same phrasing. Same assumption that eventually I'd say yes, just to make it stop. I never did. The car merged onto the main road, and I checked my mirrors out of habit. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I ignored it. There was a time for conversations and a time for confirmations. I was past the first and headed toward the second. By the time I reached a stoplight, I had my answer to one question already. Courtney hadn't chosen today at random. She'd picked a day when she knew I couldn't show up immediately. She'd counted on the gap between intent and presence. That gap is where people like her do their best work. At the next red light, I pulled up the county recorder's site on my phone. The connection lagged for a second, then loaded. I typed in the parcel number from memory. I didn't need to look it up. I'd memorized it the same way my grandmother had memorized phone numbers, not because she didn't trust the system, but because she trusted herself more. The page refreshed. There was no new filing. That was good. But there was a log entry time-stamped earlier that morning. Access. Review. Not a change. Not a submission. Someone had pulled the file. That alone wasn't illegal. Public records are public. But the timing mattered. And the frequency. 2 access points within an hour. One from a local IP. One from a mobile device. I took a screenshot and saved it. Then another. I didn't jump to conclusions. I added it to the pile. Courtney's photo replayed in my head. The angle. The truck just far enough in the background to look accidental. The message that followed. Taken care of. That phrasing wasn't for me. It was for herself. Courtney liked to narrate outcomes as if they were already done. It made resistance feel unnecessary. It made people doubt whether pushing back would even matter. It mattered. I pulled into a gas station and parked near the edge of the lot. The sun was higher now, the day fully awake. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls. 2 texts. I didn't read them. I called my attorney instead. He answered on the second ring. I didn't waste time. There are people at the house, I said. My sister told me not to go home today. I have reason to believe she's acting like she has authority she doesn't. He didn't ask me how I felt. He asked what I had. I told him about the truck, the photo, the county log access. He paused for half a second, then said, "Okay, that's enough to move." I asked him what that meant. "It means we document everything from this point forward," he said. "And you don't show up alone." That aligned with what I was already thinking. I didn't say that out loud. I just asked how fast he could get there. By evening, he said. "If you want." "I do," I said. When we hung up, I checked the messages from Courtney. I opened the longest one first. It was exactly what I expected. Reassuring language. References to family. A suggestion that I was overthinking things. She ended it with, "You can thank me later." I deleted it. The next message was shorter. "Where are you?" That one I didn't answer either. I drove the rest of the way without stopping my mind running through practicalities instead of scenarios. Who had keys? Who might claim they were invited? What could be undone and what couldn't? The house itself was sturdy. The locks could be changed. Furniture could be moved back. What mattered was establishing clearly and immediately that Courtney didn't get to set terms. I reached another red light and checked my phone again. A new message from Mark. "They're still here," he wrote. "Looks like they're moving stuff inside now." Inside. That was new. I typed back one word. "Thanks." Then I added, If anyone asks, you haven't seen me today. No problem, he replied. I pictured the living room, the shelves my grandfather built, the table my grandmother insisted on keeping even after someone offered to replace it. Courtney didn't see any of that. She saw square footage and leverage. That difference explained everything. I pulled into my driveway and sat there with the engine running, watching a leaf blow across the pavement. There was no urgency in my movements now. Everything that needed to happen was already in motion. Courtney was busy creating a version of reality that depended on me not interrupting it. She was right about one thing. Showing up unannounced would have made things messy. Showing up prepared would do something else entirely. I pulled back onto the road and set the cruise just below the limit, hands light on the wheel, eyes forward. The decision not to rush felt deliberate, almost stubborn. Rushing would have meant reacting to Courtney's timeline. I wasn't interested in that. Traffic moved the way it always did at that hour. Minivans, delivery trucks, people already irritated by the day. I blended in another car heading somewhere unremarkable. My phone stayed face down in the cup holder. If Courtney wanted my attention, she'd have to wait until I decided she deserved it. Halfway to town, my attorney called back. I answered through the car's system voice, steady. Deputies available, he said. We'll meet you there. Good, I said. I'll be on time. He didn't ask what I meant by that. He didn't need to. By the time I reached the outskirts of the neighborhood, Mark texted again. Short update. Same truck, same people, more boxes. I thanked him and put the phone down. I didn't ask him to do anything else. The point wasn't surveillance. The point was documentation. I turned onto the street slowly. A moving truck sat at the curb ramp down the back, yawning open like it had plans. Two people I didn't recognize carried boxes toward the front door. Courtney's car was parked crooked in the driveway like she'd stopped thinking about appearances the moment she felt confident. I didn't pull in. I drove past. There's a moment in situations like that where instinct tells you to confront, to park, to get out, to ask what's going on. Courtney counted on that instinct. She built her strategies around it. I kept driving until I reached the corner, then pulled over where I had a clear view without being obvious. I watched for a minute. The door opened. The door closed. Someone laughed. Courtney stepped onto the porch phone pressed to her ear, gesturing like she was explaining something important. She looked comfortable. That told me she thought the hard part was already over. My phone buzzed. This time it wasn't her. It was my attorney. We're 5 minutes out, he said. Deputies with me. Copy, I said, then added. They're actively moving items. That's fine, he replied. Just stay put. I stayed put. Courtney's phone rang again. I didn't need to check mine to know it was her calling me. I let it go. When it stopped, she tried again. Then a text came through. Why aren't you answering? I didn't respond. Silence has weight when you stop trying to fill it. A third call. Then another text. You don't need to make this difficult. That one almost earned a reply. Almost. I'd heard that line before always right before Courtney crossed a line and blamed someone else for putting it there. The moving truck driver stepped down the ramp and lit a cigarette. He leaned against the side of the truck like this was just another job. To him it probably was. He wasn't the problem. Courtney knew that too. She liked to put distance between herself and the messy parts. A car pulled up behind me, my attorney's. The deputy followed. They parked without drama. No lights, no sirens, just presence. I got out of my car and met them on the sidewalk. We didn't shake hands. We didn't trade small talk. My attorney glanced at the truck, then at the house, then back at me. You're the owner, he said. Correct. Yes. You gave no one permission to remove property today. Correct. He nodded once and turned to the deputy. That's enough. We walked together toward the driveway. Courtney noticed us halfway up the walk. Her body language changed immediately. Shoulders tightened. Smile froze. She hung up the phone mid-sentence and stepped forward. Finally, she said, forcing a laugh. I was starting to think you were avoiding me. The deputy spoke before I did. Calm voice, neutral posture. Ma'am, he said, who's directing the removal of property from this residence? Courtney blinked, then recovered. I am, she said. We're family. Are you the owner? He asked. She hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. No, she said, but then you don't have authority. he replied, still calm. I need everyone to stop what they're doing. One of the movers paused mid-step. Another set a box down carefully like he didn't want to be involved in whatever was coming next. The driver flicked his cigarette away and stood up straighter. Courtney turned to me. What is this? She demanded. You didn't need to bring police into this. I didn't bring anyone, I said. I came home. That's not the same thing, she snapped. My attorney stepped in, voice even. It is, actually. She's the property owner. You're directing activity without consent. Courtney's mouth opened, then closed. She glanced at the truck, then at the boxes, then back at me. The calculation was visible now. She was trying to decide whether to escalate or retreat. We were just helping, she said. You're busy. You said you couldn't deal with this today. I didn't say that, I replied. The deputy turned to the movers. Gentlemen, I need you to pause until we sort this out. They didn't argue. People who do physical work for a living recognize authority quickly. They stepped back, hands empty eyes, moving between Courtney and the deputy. Courtney exhaled sharply and ran a hand through her hair. This is ridiculous, she said. We didn't take anything. You don't need to, the deputy replied. Directing removal is enough. My attorney pulled out a folder and handed the deputy a single page. Ownership documentation, he said. Current. The deputy glanced at it, then nodded. He turned back to Courtney. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop and step away from the property. Courtney laughed, short and sharp. You can't be serious. I am, he said. For the first time that day, Courtney looked at me without trying to manage the moment. No smile. No framing. Just irritation edged with something like disbelief. You planned this, she said. I planned to come home, I replied. The boxes sat where they were. The ramp stayed down. The door stood open, letting the afternoon light spill across the floor. Nothing dramatic happened. No shouting. No scenes. Just a halt. The deputy asked a few more questions. Names, relationships, who called the truck. Courtney answered some of them, avoided others. Each avoidance narrowed her options. When the deputy finished, he gave clear instructions. The movers packed up. The truck driver nodded, relieved. Courtney stood on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching control slip in small, irreversible ways. I didn't look at her. I looked at the house, the doorframe, the threshold, the place where decisions had been made quietly long before Courtney ever tried to make them loud. I stepped forward and crossed it. I set my keys on the entry table and felt the familiar weight of the house settle around me unchanged in all the ways that mattered. The air smelled like cardboard and dust from moved boxes, not damage, just disruption. I didn't comment on it. I didn't need to. The deputy stood just inside the doorway writing notes while my attorney took photos with his phone, methodical and quiet. Courtney hovered near the porch, arms folded, watching every movement like she was tracking losses. She'd stopped talking. That was new. Courtney filled silence the way other people filled space, and the fact that she wasn't trying told me she was recalculating. The deputy finished his notes and asked the movers a few routine questions. They answered, nodded, and avoided eye contact with Courtney. The driver signed something on the deputy's clipboard and closed the back of the truck. The ramp went up with a hollow clang that echoed down the street. That sound landed harder than anything anyone had said so far. Courtney flinched. As the truck pulled away, my attorney stepped closer to me. There's something else, he said quietly, keeping his voice low enough that only I could hear. This setup isn't improvised. I didn't ask him what he meant. I already knew. He tapped his phone and turned the screen toward me. A timeline. Calls, emails, a reservation for the moving truck made 2 days earlier. A confirmation sent to an address Courtney used for anything she didn't want tied directly to her name. She planned this, he said, and she planned it assuming you wouldn't show. That fit too well. Courtney had always relied on certainty. She didn't test the waters. She decided outcomes and moved toward them like resistance was a technical problem. Today wasn't a spontaneous overstep. It was an execution. The deputy cleared his throat and approached Courtney. Ma'am, I need to be clear, he said. You don't have permission to be directing activity here. If you return and attempt this again without the owner's consent, it will be treated as trespass. Courtney opened her mouth, then closed it. She nodded once tight. Fine, she said. I was just trying to help. The deputy didn't respond to that. He handed her a card with a case number written on it and explained what it was. Courtney took it like it was an insult instead of a record. When the deputy left, the street went quiet in a way that felt intentional. The neighbors returned to whatever they'd been pretending not to watch. Courtney stepped off the porch and walked past me toward her car without another word. My attorney didn't stop her. He waited until the car was gone before speaking again. She didn't expect law enforcement, he said. She expected leverage. I know, I said. He glanced at the house, then back at me. There's more. I checked a few things while we were waiting. This isn't the first time she's done something like this. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. With me? Not exactly, he said. With others. Different context. Same approach. He scrolled again and showed me a list. Not accusations. Public records. A small claims filing where Courtney had claimed authority she didn't have. A complaint withdrawn after a settlement. A pattern of stepping in just far enough to create inconvenience, then letting someone else clean it up. She builds situations people want to escape, he said, then offers the exit she controls. I nodded. The words landed cleanly. Courtney didn't force outcomes. She engineered fatigue. I walked into the living room and looked at the boxes stacked near the wall. None of them were sealed. Nothing had been inventoried. This wasn't removal. It was staging. Enough movement to make the house feel unstable. Enough pressure to push a conversation she'd already decided the terms of. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Courtney. I didn't answer. A text followed. We need to talk. That one I expected. Talking was her reset button. If she could get me in a conversation, she could frame what happened as a misunderstanding. If she could frame it, she could minimize it. If she could minimize it, she could try again later. I turned my phone face down and looked at my attorney. What's the cleanest way to stop this permanently? He didn't hesitate. We lock down access. We document today. We formalize boundaries. Define formalize, I said. No trespass notice, he replied. All communication through counsel. And I recommend a credit freeze. I raised an eyebrow. Credit? She's already comfortable acting on your behalf, he said. This closes another door. That made sense. Courtney didn't respect lines. She respected obstacles. I walked through the house once slow and deliberate. The back door, the windows, the garage. Nothing damaged. Nothing missing. Just shifted. I took photos of everything not for memory but for record. I didn't feel sentimental about it. Sentiment complicates process. When I came back to the front, my attorney had drafted a notice on his tablet. He read it out loud once. Plain language. Clear boundaries. Consequences stated without emotion. I approved it. As he sent it, my phone buzzed again. Courtney persistent. Then another message from my mother. Call me. That one almost got me. Not because it carried weight, but because it carried history. Calls like that never came with accountability. They came with smoothing, with pressure to make things easier for everyone else. I didn't call. Instead, I stepped outside and changed the locks. The hardware store receipt was still in the car from a previous trip. I'd meant to replace them eventually. Eventually turned out to be now. The work was simple, measured, satisfying in the way small permanent changes often are. While I worked, my attorney made a few more calls. Quiet ones, practical ones. He confirmed the no trespass filing. He scheduled a follow-up with the county recorder. He didn't ask me how I was holding up. When I finished, I tested the new key and slid the old one into a small envelope. I wrote a date on it and set it in a drawer. Evidence doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to exist. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Courtney or my mother. It was a new number. A voicemail notification followed. I listened to it with the phone on speaker while I wiped my hands on a towel. Ms. Harper, this is Attorney Fields, the voice said. I represent your family. Please call me at your earliest convenience so we can resolve this amicably. I looked at my attorney. He listened, expression neutral. Forward that, he said. I'll respond. Resolve, I said. That's quick. They like to control the narrative early, he replied. It keeps things flexible. I forwarded the voicemail and set the phone down. The house was quieter now. Not empty. Settled. The boxes still sat where they'd been left, waiting for instructions that would never come. I stood in the kitchen and ran the tap until the water warmed, then washed my hands slowly. The day hadn't gone the way Courtney planned. That was clear. What mattered now was making sure it didn't become a rehearsal. Because if this was a pattern, then today wasn't the problem. It was the proof. I wiped my hands on the towel, folded it once, and set it on the counter, like that small order might carry forward. The house felt quieter now, not empty, just attentive. I stepped back into the living room and nudged one of the boxes aside with my foot, so it wasn't blocking the hallway. It slid easily. Whatever Courtney thought she was building here hadn't settled into place. My attorney looked up from his tablet. Fields responded, he said, already skimming. Short, polite. Wants a call. Decline, I said. I'll answer in writing, he replied, and began typing without another question. The doorbell rang once. Not sharp, not insistent. The deputy stood on the porch, hat in hand, posture relaxed. He'd come back for one more thing, signatures confirmation, the last loose ends that keep situations from becoming arguments later. We went through it together, line by line, like it was just another form. No raised voices, no commentary. When he finished, he paused. If anyone returns tonight, he said, call the number on the card. Don't engage. I won't, I said. He nodded, tipped his hat, and walked back to his car. Tires rolled down the street, normal speed. No spectacle. That was important. Courtney hated spectacle when it wasn't hers. I shut the door and turned the deadbolt. The click sounded louder than it should have. My attorney didn't react. He saved the document, synced it, and slid the tablet into his bag. Next steps are already in motion, he said. County recorder flagged the parcel. Any filings get a call to my office before they go anywhere. Good, I said. He glanced at the boxes again. We should document contents before you move anything back. I know, I said. I'll do it tonight. He nodded and checked his watch. I'll head out. Call if anything changes. I walked him to the door and watched his car disappear before I locked up again. Evening had settled in. Porch lights clicked on along the street one by one like the neighborhood resetting itself. I stood there for a moment listening. No engines. No footsteps. Just the low hum of a refrigerator and the faint tick of cooling metal from the locks I'd just replaced. I picked up my phone and saw 6 missed calls. Courtney. My mother. One more from a number I didn't recognize. I opened the last voicemail. It was Attorney Fields again, voice calm, professional. My clients are concerned, he said. They feel today got out of hand. I deleted it. Concern is what people call control when it doesn't work. I walked through the house with my phone camera on, recording slowly. Each room, each shelf. I spoke quietly as I went, noting what had been moved, what hadn't. It felt clinical, which was fine. This wasn't nostalgia. This was record-keeping. When I reached the back bedroom, I stopped. The closet door was open. Courtney had never liked that room. Too small. Too quiet. She'd once suggested turning it into storage. I closed the door and kept going. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from my mother. Please call me. Your sister is beside herself. I didn't respond. I took photos of the porch instead, then the driveway, then the side yard. Evidence doesn't argue. It just exists. After I finished, I emailed everything to my attorney and labeled the folder with the date and time. Then I set the phone down and made myself a sandwich. Turkey, mustard, nothing fancy. The normalcy felt deliberate. Halfway through eating, headlights swept across the front windows. I didn't move. I didn't rush. I finished the bite, wiped my hands, and stood where I was. A car door closed outside. Footsteps approached the porch. The knock was light practiced. Open the door, Courtney called. We need to talk. I stayed where I was. She knocked again, harder. This is ridiculous. I'm trying to fix this. I walked to the door but didn't unlock it. I stood close enough that she'd know I was there. There's nothing to fix, I said through the wood. She exhaled sharply. You embarrassed us. You brought a moving truck, I replied. That's not what happened, she snapped. It is, I said. And you were told to leave. Her voice dropped, shifting gears. You don't have to do this. We can sort it out like adults. I almost smiled. Courtney always framed compliance as maturity. Any communication goes through my attorney, I said. Please leave. Silence stretched. I could picture her weighing options. Raising her voice wouldn't help. Staying too long wouldn't help. She'd already lost the leverage she wanted. "This isn't over," she said. I didn't answer. Her footsteps retreated. The car door slammed harder this time. The engine revved and pulled away faster than necessary. I waited until the sound was gone before stepping back from the door. I checked the driveway camera feed on my phone. The car disappeared at the corner. No return. No circling. The phone buzzed again. This time it was my attorney. "She showed up?" he asked. "Yes." "Good," he said. "I'll add it to the file." I hung up and leaned against the counter, letting the quiet settle again. The evening had deepened. Streetlights hummed. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once and stopped. I didn't feel relief, I felt alignment. I sat at the table and opened my laptop, pulling up the credit bureau's sites one by one. Freezes went through cleanly. Confirmation numbers saved. Screenshots taken. Another set of doors closed, not dramatically, just permanently. As I worked, a message came through from Attorney Fields. Written this time. Polite. Suggesting a pause. Suggesting a reset. Suggesting that everyone take a breath. I forwarded it to my attorney and didn't respond. Breathing wasn't the issue. Boundaries were. When I finished, I closed the laptop and looked around the kitchen. The clock read just past 8. Evening, exactly like the message had promised. By now I understood why Courtney hadn't wanted me here earlier. She'd needed time to make absence look like permission. She'd almost succeeded. I picked up the envelope with the old keys, turned it over once in my hands, and set it in the drawer beneath the cutlery. Then I stood up and turned off the overhead light, leaving the room in a softer glow. Outside, the street looked the same as it had that morning. Calm. Ordinary. Inside, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, but because the rules had. I locked the door again, not because I needed to, but because I could. I set my phone down on the table and slid it out of reach, then took a sip of water that had gone warm while I wasn't paying attention. My throat felt dry anyway. The house stayed quiet, but my phone didn't. It buzzed again, each vibration short and insistent, like someone tapping their foot on the other side of a door. This time it wasn't Courtney. It was my father. I didn't answer. I watched the screen light up, then go dark, then light up again. A voicemail notification appeared. I ignored that too. Calls like that never came with new information. They came with pressure wrapped in familiarity. A text followed from my mother. Longer than the others. Careful wording. She wanted me to know they were hurt, confused, embarrassed. She said Courtney hadn't meant to upset anyone. She said the neighbors didn't need to be involved. She said family should handle things privately. I read it once, then again, then set the phone face down. That was the pivot I'd been waiting for. Not anger, not denial, alignment. When Courtney lost control of the situation, the family didn't ask what she'd done. They asked how to make it go away. That told me exactly where I stood. I stood up and walked to the sink, rinsed my glass, and placed it upside down on the towel. The motion grounded me. Practical, repeatable. I leaned against the counter and waited for the next move. It came quickly. Another call from my father. This time I answered. "What did you do?" he asked without greeting. "I came home," I said. "You didn't have to humiliate your sister," he snapped. "You could have called us." "You brought a moving truck," I replied. "Without permission." "That's not what happened," he said immediately. I didn't interrupt. Silence is uncomfortable for people who rely on noise to steer conversations. "She was helping," he continued. "You know she worries about you, about the house, about everything falling apart if you don't have support." "I didn't ask for support," I said. He exhaled sharply. "You're being stubborn." "I'm being clear." A pause. Then a different tone. Lower. More controlled. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" he asked. "Police? Lawyers? Neighbors watching? You made us look like criminals." I leaned back against the counter and looked at the ceiling, not because I needed patience, but because I wanted distance. "You directed people to remove property you don't own," I said. "That's what happened." He didn't deny it. That was telling. Instead, he said, "We're family." That line used to work. It didn't anymore. "Family doesn't override ownership," I replied. "And it doesn't override consent." My mother cut in on the line, her voice tight. "We just want to understand why you went this far." I didn't raise my voice, because this wasn't the first time. Silence. Not the thoughtful kind. The The kind where people realize the story they agreed on doesn't cover all the angles. She just needed one day, my mother said finally. One day to get things organized. There it was. I closed my eyes for a second, not in frustration, but in recognition. That phrase had weight. Courtney hadn't needed help. She'd needed time. Time to rearrange. Time to create a new normal. Time to make pushing back feel like undoing work instead of stopping it. One day I repeated. Yes, my mother said quickly. That's all. That's exactly the problem, I said. My father scoffed. You're blowing this out of proportion. I'm documenting a pattern, I replied. That's different. Courtney's voice suddenly cut in sharper than before. She'd taken the phone. You didn't have to do this, she said. You always do this. You overreact, then hide behind paperwork. I almost laughed. Almost. You don't get to speak for me anymore, I said. And you don't get to decide what's an overreaction when you plan this without telling me. She hesitated. Just a beat. Then she said it. I just needed one day. The words hung there heavier than she meant them to be. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. My father started talking again fast, trying to smooth it over, trying to reframe it as stress, as misunderstanding, as everyone doing their best. I let him talk. When he finished, I said one sentence. All communication goes through my attorney. My mother gasped softly. Courtney swore under her breath. You're cutting us out, my father said. No, I replied. I'm setting boundaries. That's not how families work, he snapped. It is when they have to, I said. Courtney tried one last angle. Her voice softened, went smaller. You don't trust me. That's correct, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. This isn't over, she said again. I know, I replied, which is why it's documented. I ended the call before anyone else could speak. Not out of anger, out of efficiency. My phone buzzed immediately after. Texts piled in, variations on the same theme. Hurt, shock, accusations of coldness, warnings about consequences. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the draft my attorney had sent earlier. A cease and desist letter. Clear language. Names spelled correctly. Property address precise. Consequences stated plainly. I read it once, then again. Then I sent my approval. While I waited, I checked the camera feed one more time. The driveway stayed empty. The streetlights cast clean pools of light on the pavement. Nothing moved. Another email came in. Attorney Fields again. This one longer. He acknowledged the situation. Claimed miscommunication. Requested that everyone reset expectations. I forwarded it. 10 minutes later, my attorney replied to all parties. Short, direct, no emotion. No invitations to negotiate. Communication would be in writing only. Any further attempts to access the property would be treated as trespass. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, letting the wood creak beneath me. The house didn't feel tense anymore. It felt insulated. The phone buzzed one last time. A message from Courtney. No emojis, no softness. You think you won? I didn't answer. Winning wasn't the point. Control wasn't either. The point was that the system now existed outside of her, outside of all of them. I stood up, walked to the front door, and checked the lock again. Solid. I turned off the porch light and let the interior lamps carry the room. Whatever came next wouldn't be decided in a phone call. It would be decided by whether anyone was willing to test the boundaries that were now very clearly in place. I shut the laptop and pushed it aside, then pulled a legal pad toward me and uncapped a pen that barely worked anymore. I liked pens like that. They forced you to press deliberately. I wrote the date at the top of the page and started listing things that needed to be locked down before anyone had a chance to improvise. Keys were already handled. That was done. Next was access. I opened my phone and logged into the utility accounts tied to the house. Power, water, trash. I changed passwords, added secondary verification, and updated the contact email to one only I controlled. It wasn't paranoia. It was cleanup. Courtney had always treated shared access as an invitation. It wasn't. The credit freeze confirmations sat in my inbox, clean and official. I saved them to the same folder as the photos from earlier and labeled it simply today. No emotion in the name, just accuracy. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't family. It was my attorney. I sent the cease and desist, he said. Delivered and acknowledged. By who, I asked. Fields, he replied. And your sister. That told me more than he probably realized. Courtney had read it herself. She hadn't delegated. She hadn't filtered it through anyone else. That meant it mattered. What was the response, I asked. None yet, he said. That's fine. It was more than fine. Silence meant she was deciding whether to escalate or retreat, and either choice would cost her something now. I hung up and walked through the house again, slower this time. I checked the windows from the inside, making sure the locks caught cleanly. I opened the garage and tested the door. It groaned the way it always had, then settled into place. Reliable, predictable. In the hallway closet, I found a folder Courtney had brought in earlier, probably intending to leave it behind like evidence of effort. It held printouts, contractor estimates, notes in her handwriting about updates and resale value. I flipped through it once, took photos of each page, then slid it back exactly where I found it. Documentation doesn't require confrontation. I carried the legal pad to the kitchen table and added a second column. Names. Courtney, my parents, anyone else who might try to speak on my behalf. Next to each name, I wrote one instruction: redirect to counsel. The phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked it, it was Attorney Fields again, this time, sounding more careful. My clients are requesting a pause, he said. They're concerned about potential misunderstandings escalating unnecessarily. Pause, reset, misunderstanding. The vocabulary of people who don't like consequences. I forwarded the voicemail and didn't respond. A text followed from my mother. This is tearing the family apart. I read it once and set the phone down. Families don't tear apart because of boundaries. They tear when someone refuses to respect them. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, letting the cooler air hit my face. The street was quiet again, normal in a way that felt earned. A neighbor waved from across the road. I nodded back. Nothing else needed to be said. I went back inside and pulled the old lockbox from the cabinet under the stairs. It was where my grandmother kept things she didn't want drifting. Deeds, insurance, correspondence. I opened it and added the new folder. Photos, emails, case number. All of it slid into place without resistance. As I closed the box, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Courtney texting from a new number. You really think this will stop us? I typed a response and deleted it. Then I typed another and deleted that too. Words weren't going to clarify anything. Process would. Instead, I forwarded the message to my attorney and added one line, new number. He replied almost immediately. Noted. I sat down at the table and leaned back, chair creaking softly. The house felt steady. Not safe in a sentimental way. Safe in a structural one. An email came in from Attorney Fields. Longer this time. More formal. He claimed there had been a family understanding about shared use of the property. He suggested mediation. He attached a draft agreement. I read it once, then, a second time slower. There it was. The pivot. From denial to negotiation. From control to compromise. I forwarded the email. My attorney replied to all within minutes. One paragraph. No emotion. He stated that no such agreement existed, that ownership was clear, and that any further attempts to assert rights without basis would be addressed accordingly. I closed the laptop and stood up again, stretching my shoulders. The tension I'd been carrying all day loosened, not because the problem was gone, but because it was contained. The doorbell rang. I didn't jump. I checked the camera feed first. My parents stood on the porch, close together, expressions tight. No Courtney. I didn't open the door. My father knocked harder this time. We just want to talk, he said. I stayed where I was. You need to leave, I said through the door. My mother's voice followed softer. Please. I didn't argue. I picked up my phone and called the number on the deputy's card. I didn't explain. I didn't narrate. I just reported. By the time I hung up, my parents were already backing away from the door. My father shook his head. Jaw clenched. My mother wiped at her eyes. They walked back to their car without another word. The street stayed quiet. I returned to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands didn't shake. I drank slowly, then set the glass down. Another message came in from my attorney. Good call, he wrote. That establishes a clear line. Clear lines were the point. I turned off the kitchen light and left the lamp on in the living room. The boxes still sat where they'd been left unchanged. They could wait. Nothing in them was urgent anymore. I checked the time. Just past 10. By now, everyone had said what they wanted to say. Everyone had tried the angles they knew. What remained was whether they'd accept the limits or keep testing them. I sat down at the table again and uncapped the pen, adding one last note to the legal pad. If they return again, no discussion. Then I tore the page off, folded it once, and slipped it into the lockbox. The rules didn't need to be loud to be real. I woke up before my alarm, the room still dark, the house quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than empty. For a moment, I lay there listening not for anything specific, just confirming what wasn't there. No voices outside, no car doors, no vibration from my phone lighting up the nightstand. That was new. I reached for the phone anyway. No missed calls, no texts, no emails flagged urgent. The silence wasn't accidental. It was strategic. I got up, pulled on a hoodie, and walked through the house barefoot, checking the doors out of habit more than concern. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. Locks held. Windows secure. The boxes in the living room still untouched, corners catching the early light as it crept through the blinds. In the kitchen, I made coffee and stood by the counter while it brewed, arms crossed, watching steam rise and disappear. Silence like this usually comes after a loss of leverage. Courtney wasn't regrouping loudly. She was recalculating quietly. That mattered. I sat at the table with my mug and opened my laptop. My attorney had already sent a short update overnight. County records were clean. No new access attempts. No filings. No inquiries. Everything was still. I replied with a simple acknowledgement and closed the laptop again. There was nothing else to do right now, and that was the point. When you take control away from someone who's used to having it, the first thing that follows isn't chaos. It's absence. I showered, dressed, and moved through the morning the same way I always did. No dramatic shifts, no celebration, just routine. I checked the camera feed once before leaving for work. The driveway was empty. The street looked ordinary enough that if I didn't know what had almost happened, I might have missed how deliberate that ordinariness was. On base, the day unfolded without surprises. Briefings, tasks, conversations that had nothing to do with my family. I didn't mention any of it. I didn't need to. The discipline I relied on at work wasn't separate from the way I handled this. It was the same muscle. Around midday, my phone buzzed. An email from my attorney. "They've gone quiet," he wrote. That's not unusual. I didn't reply immediately. I waited until I finished what I was doing, then typed back one line. Let me know if that changes. Quiet didn't mean resolved. It meant stalled. Later, during a short break, I checked my personal email. Nothing from my parents. Nothing from Courtney. Nothing from Attorney Fields. The demand letter had evaporated as quickly as it appeared. That told me more than any apology would have. People who believe they're right push harder. People who realize they're exposed pull back. That afternoon, I received a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. "Heard things got tense," she wrote. "Hope you're okay." I read it and didn't respond. Gossip always travels faster than truth, but it also burns out quicker. I wasn't interested in correcting narratives. Anyone who mattered already had the facts. When I got home that evening, the house greeted me the same way it had the night before. Quiet, stable. I changed clothes, reheated leftovers, and ate standing at the counter. Normal things, grounding things. Halfway through dinner, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to it, it was Attorney Fields again this time, careful to the point of stiffness. "My clients have decided not to pursue further action at this time," he said. "They'd like to avoid escalation." I forwarded the voicemail and added one word to my attorney. Noted. The response came back a few minutes later. "That's effectively a withdrawal." I nodded once to myself and set the phone down. Avoiding escalation was a polite way of saying they'd realized how bad it would look if they kept going. Courtney wasn't retreating because she understood boundaries. She was retreating because she'd lost the ability to cross them without consequences. That distinction mattered. Over the next few days, the silence held. No drive-bys. No surprise visits. No messages slipping through new numbers. My parents didn't call. Courtney didn't text. The family group chat stayed dormant like a room no one wanted to enter first. I used the time to finish the practical things. I unpacked the boxes myself, returning everything to where it belonged. I updated insurance contacts. I scheduled a locksmith to rekey the garage door. Small actions, permanent ones. Each task felt less like cleanup and more like reinforcement. One afternoon, my attorney sent another update. Attorney Fields had formally confirmed in writing that his clients were withdrawing all claims and would not contest ownership. The language was dry, professional, final. I printed the email and placed it in the lockbox under correspondence. That night, I sat on the couch with the lights, low phone on the coffee table, untouched. I wasn't waiting for it to ring. I was noticing that it didn't. That was the shift. Control doesn't always end with a confrontation. Sometimes it ends when there's nothing left to push against. Courtney's strategies relied on reactions. Without them, she didn't have a move. A week passed, then another. Life filled in the space the drama had vacated. Work deadlines, groceries, maintenance tasks, the kind of ordinary details that don't leave room for manipulation because they don't invite commentary. I heard updates indirectly. Courtney was angry. Then she was quiet. Then she was busy with something else. My parents stopped mentioning the house entirely. The topic had become radioactive. Good. One evening, as I locked the door before bed, I caught my reflection in the glass. I didn't look triumphant. I looked rested. That was the difference between winning and stabilizing. I hadn't gained anything new. I'd stopped losing ground. I turned off the lights and went to bed. The house settling around me the way it always had, without ceremony. Whatever version of reality Courtney had been trying to install had failed to load, and nothing rushed in to replace it. I woke to the sound of rain tapping lightly against the bedroom window, steady and unhurried. It had started sometime during the night, the kind of rain that doesn't announce itself, just shows up and gets to work. I lay there for a minute listening, then swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floor was cool under my feet. The house felt solid, unchanged, like it had been doing its job while I slept. In the kitchen, I made coffee and watched the rain streak down the glass while it brewed. No alerts. No missed calls. No messages waiting to be interpreted. Just the morning arriving on schedule. I took my mug to this table and sat down, letting the warmth settle into my hands. There was a time when silence like this would have made me uneasy. It would have felt like something was missing, like I was supposed to be responding to someone else's needs or bracing for the next demand. Now it felt earned. I checked my phone once, not because I expected anything, but because I wanted to confirm the pattern had held. It had. No new emails from attorneys. No family texts trying a softer angle. No unexpected numbers. I stood up, rinsed the mug, and put it in the rack. Small routines have a way of reinforcing reality better than any conversation ever could. Before leaving for work, I walked through the house one more time. Not to inspect, just to move through it. The living room looked lived in again, not staged. The boxes were gone. The shelves were back where they belonged. The spare bedroom door stayed closed exactly the way I liked it. At the front door, I paused long enough to check the lock out of habit. It clicked into place smoothly. Reliable, predictable. On base, the day unfolded with the same structure I'd always relied on. Briefings, deadlines, clear expectations. No one there knew about the week I just had, and that was fine. I didn't need witnesses. I needed continuity. During lunch, my attorney sent one last message. Short, clean. All filings withdrawn. Title clear. No pending actions. I replied with a simple thank you and archived the thread. That was it. No victory lap. No final confrontation. Just confirmation. Later that afternoon, I drove back to the house with the windows cracked, rain having given way to a clear, cool sky. The street looked exactly the way it always had. Kids riding bikes farther down. Someone mowing a lawn. Life continuing without commentary. I parked, grabbed my bag, and went inside. The smell of the house was familiar again, no trace of cardboard or dust. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and kicked off my boots, letting them land where they landed. For the first time since that morning at 6 a.m., I didn't think about Courtney at all. That realization came quietly. No satisfaction attached to it. Just absence. In the evening, I pulled the lockbox out from under the stairs and opened it at the table. Inside, everything was where it should be. Deeds, insurance, the printed email confirming withdrawal, the folded note I'd written to myself with the rules I wouldn't bend. I added one more sheet. Dated. Simple. Access secured. Boundaries enforced. I closed the box and slid it back into place. Dinner was simple. Pasta, jar sauce, a piece of bread I'd forgotten to toast. I ate slowly, standing at the counter, thinking about how much energy I'd spent in the past managing other people's expectations without ever questioning why they had them. What this cost me wasn't the relationship I used to think I had. That had already been conditional. What it cost me was the illusion that keeping the peace meant keeping control. What it gave me back was time. Time not spent explaining. Time not spent defending decisions that weren't up for debate. Time not spent bracing for the next just one thing request. After dinner, I stepped out onto the porch and sat on the top step, letting the air cool my face. The streetlights flicked on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. Somewhere down the block, a radio played softly through an open window. I thought back to that first message. Don't go home today. It wasn't a warning. It was a test. Courtney had assumed I'd do what I always did, which was adjust. Stay flexible. Stay away long enough for her version of events to settle into place. She hadn't expected me to show up with paperwork instead of apologies. That was the shift she couldn't recover from. I didn't feel angry about it anymore. Anger burns energy without producing anything useful. What I felt instead was clarity, the kind that doesn't ask for validation. When I went back inside, I turned off the lights, room by room, leaving the house in its nighttime configuration. The bedroom felt calm when I stepped into it, the kind of calm that comes from knowing no one else is waiting to rearrange things while you're not looking. I set my phone on the nightstand face down and didn't set an alarm. My schedule was already locked in. Lying there, I realized something else. This wasn't just about property or control or even family. It was about choosing systems over personalities, rules over moods, documentation over arguments. That approach had worked for me everywhere else in my life. There was no reason it shouldn't work here too. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires humming on the pavement. Then nothing. I closed my eyes and let the quiet do what it does best. Not erase what happened, but make it irrelevant. By the time sleep settled in the house had already proven what I needed to know. It didn't need managing. It needed respecting. And so did I. Looking back, what stayed with me wasn't the confrontation or the paperwork. It was the moment I realized how easily family drama turns into something else when control replaces trust. Revenge stories aren't always loud. Sometimes family revenge stories are quiet, procedural, and rooted in knowing when to stop explaining and start protecting yourself. Walking away from manipulation doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. If stories like this resonate with you, real situations, real boundaries, and the kind of decisions that actually happen in life, consider subscribing to the channel. More stories like this are coming, and each one goes deeper into how ordinary family dynamics can quietly change everything.